Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello and welcome back to Meanwhile, Here on Earth. We are broadcasting out of the beautiful state of Utah on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. You can find us there live every week by going to live stream at the top of their page, and their page is kgradb.com. If you decide to subscribe to the network by the week or the month, it gives you access to all of their many shows. And if you enter my name, Peter, in the box where you will be subscribing as your code, you'll receive a full 30% off. Well, tonight's guest is somebody I've been looking forward to speaking to for some time, because he is the most knowledgeable person I know on one of the first UFO cases to truly capture my imagination, and very early on in my work. In November of 1978, as many of you know, the United Nations held a historic series of meetings in the General Assembly under the auspices of the Special Political Committee to simply take a vote to establish a committee to study UFOs, no more, no less. As it worked out, the resolution passed. And not surprisingly, as it worked out, the motion was allowed to die in committee, and it never happened. But the event was historic. And because I had been a research assistant on a paper that was submitted to at the request of the Secretary General of the UN, I got to attend the meetings, and there on the floor of the General Assembly, speaking to the delegates about the UFO situation, reality, were Dr. Alan Hynek, Stanton T. Friedman, Jacques Vallée. The astronaut Gordon Cooper was supposed to be there, but we had a major blizzard the day before, and his flight was canceled. His statement was read into the record. The Valentich disappearance took place very shortly, a month, 2 months before this event, as you'll find out shortly. And one of the speakers, I cannot remember who, whether it was Vallée, Hynek, or Friedman, turned and specifically addressed the Australian representative to the United Nations. And it was quite terse. It was to the effect of, Mr. Ambassador or Representative, one of your citizens has been kidnapped or gone missing or been killed or injured, but they have been taken. They're gone. This violates laws of your country, standards for human treatment, etc. What do you intend to do about it? I don't remember the response. I just remember the look on the ambassador's face of, how dare you call attention to me on this subject, which we all know is ludicrous. And I like my cushy job here, so don't make me take this seriously in public. Our guest tonight is George Simpson. He was born in Melbourne, Australia, in 1958, and has had a lifelong interest in the subject of UFOs since seeing one together with his sisters in 1967. His book, UFOs, Where Do They Come From? He read the book, UFOs, Where Do They Come From? By the Australian ufologist Richard Tambling in 1969, while still in primary school. Tambling, a highly respected UFO researcher, investigator, and author in Australia, not very well known in the States here. George witnessed the initial part of the final flight of Frederick Valentich on October 21st, 1978, this from his family home in Beaumaris. Simpson became a member of Viewforce, the Victorian UFO Research Society, in 1987, just after the Knowles case was reported in the news. He later joined Viewforce committee as a photographic consultant, listed as photographic officer in 1992, and serving on that committee for the following 8 years. In 2000, Simpson set up the Victorian branch of AUFORN, the Australian UFO Research Network, where he ran investigations and followed up on hundreds of sighting reports over the next 14 years. Throughout that time, he ran 4 public meetings each year in his role as the director of the state of Victoria. During this period, he also wrote a regular column titled What's Next, which was followed by a column titled Now Then for the Ufologist magazine from 2000 until the magazine closed until February of 2018. George participated in the research, assistance, and filming of the first episode of the Science Channel production of Unexplained Files in 2013, which examined the Valentich mystery. He closed the AUFORN, how you're going to have to tell me how we pronounce that acronym, for Victoria in 2014, following the closure in Queensland, New South Wales. 3 years later, he began work on his book about the Valentich mystery, disappearance, UFO incident. The book is titled Nothing on Radar. George Simpson, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. It's a very, very nice introduction to have. And it's a pleasure to be here with you and to talk about this case. It's really affected me. I've thought about it a lot over many, many years. I mean, since the time it happened, I do think about it every day. Yeah. And it's very interesting response that you got from that Australian delegate that you spoke to, who was very sort of upset by you confronting him. Yeah. What are you going to do about this case? Wow. That is amazing. But it doesn't surprise me.
Again, we're dealing with these events were less than a month apart.
Right.
And I don't know if an Australian would have asked the Australian representative these questions. But again, we had several Americans here, all of them very charged up, with this being probably the best known active UFO incident known worldwide at the time, because it was so unique. And there's something I don't have to tell you, elegiac, sad, poignant, very human tragedy, very infuriating on a certain level. And we still have this mystery at hand. But you have looked into it more than anyone on the record that I'm aware of. And I wanted to begin by asking you, you had your childhood incident with your sisters that created your interest. I can relate because I got involved essentially the same way, having a sighting with one of my sisters when we were kids, putting it out of my mind because I could not deal with it. And then when the memory returned, my life changed markedly.
Okay.
Can you tell us about that sighting and what you were doing, time of day, anything that can give us a sense of this life-changing event for you?
Well, it was early evening, and the three of us, I've got 2 older sisters, I'm the younger brother, the 3 of us were just walking down the street to visit some neighbours that were right at the other end of our street. And my sister Norma just suddenly almost screamed and said, look at that. And she's pointing at the sky straight ahead of us because we were just walking along, not really paying attention. But she looked up and noticed these 2, they just look like satellites, really, 2 bright lights, stars. And at first they were just stationary, sitting there together above kind of the end of our street. They suddenly moved apart from each other. They just suddenly started moving apart. And she thought, wow, what is that? And we kept watching them as we walked up the street, and we got to the neighbour's place that we were visiting. One was heading due north and one was heading due south. And The one that was going south stopped after traveling, well, it's hard to say how far it went, but from directly 90 degrees from us, it had gone like 45 degrees south and stopped. But the one going north continued and it didn't stop moving until it went right kind of into orbit, or like into outer space. It appeared to anyway. It just went in a straight line steadily. There was no sound or anything. They were looked like they were things in orbit. They could have been, but they were in stationary orbit when we first saw them. They were stationary. Then they just suddenly started moving apart like that across the sky, like that across the sky. So yeah, it was very unusual, and we just were very surprised by that. But it didn't really surprise us all that much, because there was always, every few weeks, there was some other UFO report in the news, on the TV. There were things going on all the time during the 60s. This was in the late 60s, this happened. It would have been 1967, 1968, around that time. So I was about 10 when this happened. And also, I was in primary school then. The funny thing about primary school is they taught us how to read. Then they encouraged us to read books. And the first book that I picked up was the UFO book. That was the first book I ever read. I grew up on a diet of The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone. So everybody culturally knew what flying saucers were and aliens. And the beauty of that was my favourite TV show, The Outer Limits. A different alien TV every week, different aliens every week. And they were very to my mind, they were very imaginative stories about different kinds of alien encounters happening with people. I just thought that was fascinating. And it was the beginning of the space race. We had the Gemini project. We watched all the Gemini launches and the film of them floating around on those long cables in space, the spacewalks. So that was all what I grew up with, was that sort of stuff. So reading about UFOs didn't seem like something that should be rejected or discounted. I read them as a kid pretty uncritically. I wasn't thinking scientifically, and I wasn't trying to discredit everything that I read. I read it and I thought, well, these are just reports coming in from people who've had these, and we'd seen something ourselves. So it all made sense to me. Right.
George, do you remember whether you and your sisters told your parents about this? And if so, do you remember their reaction?
I don't think we did actually mention it to them, or we may not have. Around the same time, that Stanley Kubrick movie 2001: A Space Odyssey came out, and we were very excited. I was very excited about that. There was a movie. I was probably expecting something like a Star Trek kind of thing, really. That's sort of what I was kind of expecting. And my birthday came up. It was my 10th birthday. And I asked my mum if all my friends could go with me, if we could go to the movie theatre and see this great space movie. And so there was about 7 or 8 of us kids went to see, and we were probably expecting something like Star Wars or something.
Sure.
But
it
was not designed for kids, And my mother's comment when we came out of the theatre after the movie, she saw 6 or 7 of us come out. She said she'd never seen a bunch of little kids looking so bewildered and astonished when we came out, because we didn't get it.
The 10 minutes of going through the light years would be enough to transform a child's brain.
Now, apparently the teenagers of the time loved it because they'd smoke a bit of dope and then watch the movie, and it all made sense to them. But we were young and innocent, so we were just astonished. It didn't make any sense to us.
The film, even though I saw it when I was a bit older, I saw it at the then preeminent movie theater in New York City, the Ziegfeld, in the West 50s, which boasted, maybe it still does, had the widest screen and best sound system of any film in New York. And
Right.
if you sat toward the center in the first 20 or 25 rows, your peripheral vision really was challenged by the width of the screen. And with the sound system, it was an experience. I was also lucky enough to see Lawrence of Arabia and the first Jurassic Park movie there. And when that train derailed in Lawrence of Arabia, I thought I was going to die. I'm off on a tangent here. So you move into young adulthood with this as an interest. What had you thought, what was your dream as a young person of what you might want to be or what you did become as a grown-up?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I was one of those people that could never really decide what he wanted to be. I had an interest in architecture. Like I thought I might be an architect one day. But
have you decided now what you want to be when you grow up?
No, I'm still trying to work it out. Still trying to work it out. So I ended up making all the wrong choices, as you can in life. You make different choices. I ended up studying psychology, and I ended up going to university to do psychology at university. But I dropped out after about halfway through the course. I figured it felt like I was being panel beated into a shape. It just wasn't me. It just academia and all that nitpicking of details and stuff. I couldn't put people in little pigeonholes. But I couldn't do that. That's not how people. You can't analyze why people do things, like why they suddenly do something that they think is something that's wrong. Why are some people criminals and other people are not? I couldn't work that out. So for me, I just wanted to get out and enjoy life. And I ended up studying off as a social worker, a very lowly paid job. And but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the social interaction in that. But I've ended up in retail, which is probably my favorite job. I've been there for nearly 20 years now in retail, selling digital cameras and batteries and memory cards, everything to do with photography. Because one of the early jobs I did have was I was a camera repair technician.
Oh, wow.
Back in the film days, the 35mm film days, I'd pull a camera apart, find out what was wrong, put it back together, and it would all work. Occasionally, there might be one screw left over or something, but it would still work. So I ended up doing camera repairs for many years, and it was like a trade I kept going back to, and I would try something else, and then I'd end up going back to camera repairs. But I ended up in retail instead, camera retail. So for me, photography and cameras has been kind of the mainstay of my employment generally. So after we finish today, I'm going off to the work Christmas party with the camera company, the camera shop that I work for. So it's called Ted's Cameras. It's in Australia. It's pretty big in Australia, but it's not a huge company. But I've been with them nearly 20 years, and I like the retail thing. It's like having a disease of some kind where you like interacting with people and helping guide them to get the right lens or whatever for their camera,
Something sorely missing from most camera sales these days, of a very different type of technology, all online and rather impersonal.
I've got this kind of background information on the camera because I can pull them apart and rebuild them. So most salespeople don't do that, I guess. I'm more of an engineer than a salesperson.
George, by the time of the Valentich incident in October of 1978, were you already a student of the subject, or you had kind of set it aside? It was a passing, kind of a subdued interest, or were you actively reading in that area, or was it the Valentich incident that, to put it mildly, triggered your deeper involvement in the subject?
Over many years, I'd read the occasional book. The news, there's always some new UFO report would come up in the news occasionally. So I was always monitoring it for something. I was always keeping an eye on it. for some reason, I was always just interested in those news reports over and above any other reports. So anything about UFOs.
To do now is, and I rarely can do this with somebody in terms of a case investigation, but because Frederick Valentage, a young man in his early 20s, was the victim here. He's a private pilot, well-trained, competent, a younger person of good character as far as we know. Some of the names, some of the charges leveled against him once he was gone to rationalize, in the debunker's mind, including, irresponsible flying, activity in illegal drugs, etc., were incredibly ugly. And it's one thing to be in denial about this subject. I respect and have a certain amount of absolute empathy for anybody who is. It's very challenging. But I'd like to start by asking you to give us a picture in so many words of the Valentage family and of Frederick and what you know about his growing up to the point of where he sadly became a world-famous figure.
Well, everything that I know about him, I never met him. I never spoke to him. I didn't know the guy. I did see him fly past on the day that he disappeared, but I never met him. But years later, I got involved in the UFO Research Society, they were called VUFORS, the Victorian UFO Research Society. Was an established group that had started as the Flying Saucer Research Society in the sort of mid-60s. A prominent lawyer started that group up, and with a journalist named John Pinckney. John Pinckney is the reason why we still have a good quality copy of this photograph that's on the cover of the book, because he was a journalist and he was very intrigued by that photo, and he preserved it. And that's the only, because the fellow who actually took the photo, the photographer, has lost his original photographs, and he's lost his original negative as well. And I go into that in the book as well. But so my interest in the subject sort of never waned. It would come and go with the news reports and things, but seeing Fred, I don't know about his childhood. Like, I didn't grow up in his area or anything. We had a few similar things, though. We had similar interests. We both rode motorcycles as teenagers, like on dirt bike tracks. We were both interested in motorcycles, but in an amateur sort of way. I think he might have been a bit more serious about that than I was. We both ended up driving our first car. We both ended up with an Italian, the same brand of Fiat, Italian cars. Fred's first car was a Fiat. My first car was a Fiat. It's just a coincidence. It's just a bit weird. But I think I pushed my Fiat more in the first week that I owned it than I drove it. It had a few problems. But I was able to fix it up, so I kept it for a few years. I used to do mechanical work on my own cars. I don't know whether Fred was like that. He probably was a bit of a tinkerer because he had motorbikes and things like I did. But what happened with Fred was Fred went, he talked his father into taking him for a joy flight in a plane. And I don't know why he did that, but once he had been in a plane, he decided he wanted to become a pilot. Now, when I was about 12, I talked my dad into taking me for a joy flight as well. And but I never wanted to become a pilot as a result of that. I never entertained the idea, but I took a camera with me the first time I went in the plane. I had a Polaroid camera, which I got for my 12th birthday. So it must have been 1970, because that was when I turned 12. And we went up in the plane. We flew over my auntie's place. Took some photographs of her backyard. She was standing in the backyard and the dog was running around. We could see that as we flew over. But it didn't make me want to become an aviator. But in Fred's case, it did. He wanted to become a pilot. And so he got himself employment so that he could pursue the expensive course of taking flying lessons and learning to fly. That was quite an expensive thing to do. And he could see that the careers in aviation were a little bit limited. You'd either become a commercial pilot or you'd be in the Air Force. So he joined the Air Cadets. And I did send you, there was a photograph of him in the Cadets.
Yes.
As a young man. Yes. That's
in fact, that one
a black and white photograph of him. Yeah, there's the whole group. And he's in that front row on the very right-hand side. Yeah, that's a close-up of him there. That's him when he was a cadet. And he would have been probably, about 16 years old or 17 years old.
Mm.
And they trained him. He learned to fly. That was at a place called Sale. It's a large regional country town, very much on the east coast of Victoria, north of Melbourne, but right out on the east coast. And so they were quite impressed with Fred. They thought that he was he would have made a good flight instructor. He could have taught people to fly. That's what they thought. But he if you want to get into the Air Force, you've got to be the top, get top marks in everything, or they don't take you. And Fred wasn't quite at that level of academic ability. He didn't quite get there. So he decided, well, if I can't get into the Air Force, I'll just become a commercial pilot because I want to fly. That was what he wanted to do. He concentrated on the idea of being a professional pilot. That's what he wanted to do. So when he went down to King Island on the day that he disappeared, he was getting more flight hours. He didn't necessarily. There was a lot of controversy after he had disappeared when they looked into his flight plan. Why was he going down there? What was the story? What was he up to? Why was he flying down there in a single engine plane into the twilight? Basically, he flew into the twilight.
Yes.
Which is why I called chapter 1 of the book "Into the Twilight," because a lot of people get it wrong. They say, "Oh, it was a night flight," but it wasn't nighttime. He took off in where we are in Melbourne. We are the southernmost part of Australia without going down further into Tasmania, but we're actually closer to the Antarctic region than we are to Darwin, which is the northern part of Australia. We're closer to the South Pole in Melbourne. So we're quite down a long way. We're down 32 degrees south. If I want to set up a telescope, I've got to point it and I want to track something, I've got to point it at the south celestial pole. I've got to set the telescope on the south axis has to be on 32 degrees. So we're down quite a long way down. So the result of that is we get long twilight periods, especially around October. It was October the 21st. It's quite a long twilight period. It's about half an hour or so. So once the sun goes down, you've got about another half an hour before it gets dark. So you're in this sort of half an hour twilight zone. So Fred would have made it to King Island before it got dark. When he was over Cape Otway at 4,500 feet, which is where he was, he could actually see King Island from there. And they wouldn't have been driving around with headlights on their cars. So it would have been getting dark, but it wasn't dark yet. Yeah. He could have landed. And one of the speculations was, why didn't he request those landing lights to be turned on at King Island? Well, they would have had to be manually switched on. But he was running a bit late when he left. He had intended to leave about half an hour earlier, and he knew that he wouldn't need landing lights. And he would have been at the airport, and he could have taken off from the airport without any drama, and it would have been a night flight home. So all these people say, oh, well, he got one of the first Australian Department of Aviation experts was one of the first people a day or two after he disappeared. He's one of the first people to say, oh, he probably became disorientated. A lot of pilots can do that. It's quite easy to lose your sense of where you are spatial reality,
Sure.
where's the horizon, which way up am I?
Yeah.
Pilots can get disorientated if they're in the total darkness, but he could see where he was. And there were planets. A lot of the skeptics have said, he saw these planets flying around him. Well, the planets just stay stationary.
Sure.
One of the 3 planets that they said was there at the time, you need a telescope to see it. Mercury, you can't see Mercury with the naked eye. Not unless you're using a telescope, or not unless it's it depends where it is. Astronomy and lighting conditions can alter. But he would have seen a couple of the planets. Well, one was Mars, and which is just a red. It looks like it's not a very bright or very large object, Mars. So I think Jupiter was the other one. He would have seen Jupiter directly ahead as he was flying west.
So let me jump in for a moment here, George. At this point, had Frederick received his, say, full certification as a pilot, or he was still considered in training? He was obviously on a solo flight, so he had beyond the point where he needed an instructor co-pilot. Where was he in his aviation education at this point?
Yeah. He had a private pilot license, so he could fly anywhere he wanted to. But he had a Class 4 instrument rating, so he could fly alone at night. If he could use his instruments to land and things like that, if he got caught up in fog or things like that, he was just a kid, he's 20 years old. I'd really like to emphasize that he's a 20-year-old guy. He didn't have years and years and years of experience. He had about 150 hours of flight experience. And then I have a friend who has his own aircraft, and I've flown with him down there over Cape Otway. He said it's not the usual thing to do, to fly over the sea alone at night time in a single engine plane. That's just not what you normally do. He said you normally get someone to go with you, and you normally get a twin-engined aircraft if you're going to go over the sea in the dark, especially if you're inexperienced.
And he was rated to fly a twin-engine aircraft as well as the single engine.
I'm not 100% sure about that. He might have been. I don't know about that.
Okay.
No one's ever asked me that question before. It's a good one, Pete. It's a good question. But he was rated to fly an airplane, and he'd been down there a few times before, and it was in the daytime. He'd always flown down in the daytime. But it was his first. His return flight would have been his first crossing the ocean at night.
Right.
Had he got to his destination, but he never got to his destination.
Yeah.
He didn't
George,
reach it.
about what's the difference, the distance between the airport that Valentich departed from and King Island?
Oh, it's about 90 to 100 minutes flying time. So distance-wise, it's quite a long way. I could use Google Maps and actually measure it, but it's
90 minutes flying time.
Yeah, it's about in kilometers. It's about 380 kilometers or something. So in miles, that would be,
that's considerable.
What would that be? 250 miles or something?
Thereabouts.
George, I'm not sure.
In your research and investigation, in developing background that, of course, is all presented in your marvelous book, and I should tell viewers and listeners, I have not finished reading George's book yet, but I'm about a third into it and completely caught up in it. So in your research, were you able to put together any kind of behind-the-scenes personal information that allows you a best guess, the best educated guess you can make as to why he was making this particular flight, or does it remain generally a mystery as far as anybody that knows him?
Well, look, the main explanation for his flight was that it had two purposes. He was going down to pick up some crayfish because there was an officers' party that night. There was going to be a party, I think it was at Moorabbin Airport at the Flying Club. There was an officers' party, and he would go down to King Island and pick up some crayfish, which is lobsters.
Sure.
But we call it, in Australia, we call it crayfish. We call everything different things. It's the same.
Yes.
You might call them crawfish, but I think that's like a mud crab, isn't it? Well, it's a crayfish, and it's a lobster. The owners of the aircraft didn't like people going down to King Island picking up seafood and bringing it back, because the plane ends up smelling like a fish shop.
Of course, yeah.
So that presented a problem. Those a plastic ice box that you can seal.
Sure.
There's a brand name. We call it an esky.
Yeah, like Eskimo. Yeah.
Yeah, we just call it an esky, the ice box. It's just a brand name down here. And so he would have an ice box in the back of the plane, but he covered it by putting in 4 life jackets to hide the esky, right? Because he didn't want to get in trouble for flying crayfish around. So in the plane. Now, the mechanic who serviced the plane that morning, a guy called Mike Hodges, I know him personally. I've met him in the last few years, and he lives pretty close to me. He told me that there's many times he'd lost count of the times when planes would come in from King Island and land at Moorabbin, and the pilot was getting out, and they'd take the eskies out and put them on the ground, but the lids would open up and the crayfish would get out and they'd be walking across the tarmac, and they'd be running around picking them up and putting them back in the boxes. So that was quite a common occurrence. There was nothing unusual about people doing what Fred was doing. Some people speculated, he must have been going to pick up some passengers down at King Island, because he had all these life jackets in the plane.
Oh.
But I think the life jackets were just to hide the esky.
Camouflage, yeah.
You see, I don't know. Now, one of these Australian officials said he probably got disorientated, and went into a spiral, or was flying inverted, flying upside down. Now, you can't do that in a Cessna without knowing that you're upside down, because you're hanging by your seatbelt and everything in the plane flies up and hits the ceiling. You'd be aware if you were upside down. He was flying this plane with one hand on the control, the other hand he's holding the microphone, and he's having a conversation with Steve Roby. So he could. It wasn't dark yet, so he wasn't disorientated. And Steve has said he didn't show any signs of spatial disorientation at all. So he was just flying along normally, describing this thing that was coming and going very rapidly. He said, that it was. He said at one point it appeared to be chasing him.
Let's hold it right there, because I want to lead into it with some of the photos that you send first. Mm-hmm. This is the book, Nothing on Radar, The Valentage Mystery. And that Nothing on Radar plays very strongly into the story as we go. George, tell us about this special photo.
This one here, well, that's on the ground. We're pretty sure it's Moorabbin Airport. That's not the same aircraft that he disappeared in, but there he is just posing. I'm not sure who took the photo. I've asked his younger sister, did she know who the photographer was? And she said no, she didn't know. It could have been Fred's father took it, but we don't know. So it's very hard to get a handle on that. It's a very old photo, but that's a very, very slim young Fred standing there with his hand on the cone at the front of the prop.
Yeah, obviously a teenager at some level.
He would have become a very young commercial pilot. Now that photo has only just come into our possession, this particular photo, this colour one of the plane, only a couple of months ago. Steve Roby, it was sent to him and he sent it on to me.
How did this photo come to you? I mean, this is the plane, not a similar model.
No, that's the actual one. And what I didn't know, I thought it had dark blue stripes along the bottom of the fuselage, but they're black. If you zoom in on it, they're black with gold pinstriping.
Yeah.
and along the tail or the back of the fuselage is a kind of a light blue colour. But I saw a blue and white, what appeared to me to be blue and white as it went past.
That's right. Yeah.
Also,
the photo is aged a bit, so what looks maroon is black.
Well, that photo there is from 1968 when the plane was new. So I was 10 years old, and so was Fred. Fred wasn't flying yet when that photo was taken. That was taken by a fellow named Cam Kerr, who operated out of the Tooradin airfield, which is it's a country area airfield. The runways are basically just grass runways, or they were then. That plane was new, and Cam took that photo. But he didn't own the plane. He wasn't the owner of the plane.
Yeah. Of course, even in this kind of relatively simple situation, with a small plane on a small job or errand or whatever, you must file a flight plan. You've seen that flight plan?
Yeah, that has been published. I think I have seen that in a few different places. I don't have a copy of that actual document myself, but it has the owner of the aircraft at the time the plane disappeared. And the flight plan was just that he was going down to King Island and coming back. It didn't actually stipulate that he was going to land. And that brings into question, well, why was he going down there if he wasn't landing? You'd have to land if you're going to pick up the crayfish. The fellow who worked at the airport on King Island, his name is Brian Jones, and they phoned him and told him there's a plane that's taken longer to arrive than we thought. Would you turn on the landing lights? And he was on the radio trying to contact and got no reply. But it was all a bit too late by the time Brian came to the picture, but he was going to turn on the lights.
Yeah.
But Brian speculated that Fred might have been suicidal and might have used flying as a way to end his life, to crash into the sea or something. The trouble with that theory was that Fred had just started dating a young lady called Rhonda, and they'd been going to dances, and they'd won a few dance competitions, and he was wanting to get out there, turn around, come back, and go to a party and catch up with Rhonda. In fact, Rhonda often flew with him, and she was going to fly with him on the day he disappeared, but she said a number of circumstances prevented her from getting to the airport in time to meet up with him to go. Unusual circumstances just kept delaying her. She had to work later in her job. She couldn't get home in time. She couldn't get a taxi soon enough to get quick enough to line up with Fred. So that's one of the reasons Fred was a bit delayed, because he was hoping Rhonda would turn up and they would go down together to King Island.
I see.
But she never turned up. And this was before we had mobile phones. So it was all landlines. And if you rang somebody and they weren't inside and they didn't hear the phone, it would just keep ringing, But anyway, so he went down and he was flying by himself. And there's a lot of mystery about what it basically comes down to the fact he was increasing his flight hours because he wanted to become a commercial pilot eventually. Yeah. He was going into that. He had failed a few of his exams, He had a few tests. He sat the test and not passed the test. Well, what you do is you study some more and you resit the exam, and you still sit the test until you pass. That's what you do. A lot of people tried to say, well, they're trying to blame him. They're saying he wasn't a clever enough person to be a commercial pilot because he couldn't pass the test. But most people take a few goes to get into it.
Like a driving test, an auto driving test, most of us don't pass on the first go round.
Yeah. So, there's been a lot of things said about him that were pretty unfair. Now, he's a 20-year-old kid flying a plane, and he's encountered this thing that he can't describe, and he's tried describing it. Now, you put that photo of the cover of the book up just before. that photograph there's a strange object in that photo, that sunset photo.
And we're going to get to that in a moment. I have a question for you that has, I mean, you simply stated it's fact and that's it, but it's such a haunting detail, a personal detail, which was you actually observed for a brief period of time, Frederick in his Cessna, of course, far enough away, obviously couldn't see him, but you saw that plane at a point when it was departing the airfield heading into the twilight, as you say. My first question is, how did it come? You weren't obsessed with UFOs. You lived in an area with a fair amount of air traffic. Valentich was not a famous person. How did you know that was his plane and that was him, and that it stayed in your mind? As opposed to another Cessna going by?
Look, where we lived was about 3 or 4 minutes flight time from Moorabbin Airport. Now, Moorabbin Airport was at the time probably the busiest light aircraft airport in the Southern Hemisphere. It was a very, very busy airport. I always watched planes flying over and helicopters. Every day there was lots of aircraft, but all small stuff, not the big ones.
Yeah.
But I always watched them fly over, and it was happening all the time. So, but I had a visitor coming to my house, and they were a bit late, so I went outside. I was just waiting at the front for this visitor to turn up, who didn't show. Actually, it was a no-show. But while I was standing out there, I saw this plane go by, and I just watched it. And I didn't think anything more of it, but a thought popped into my mind, which I cannot explain, as I was looking at the plane. And it was just, don't take your eyes off that plane. Keep your eye on that plane. That was it was like I picked up a message or something. Look, I'm not psychic, and I don't claim to be a psychic, and I can't explain why I thought this way, but I watched that plane until it disappeared from my line of view, because, there's a golf course at the end of our street and tall trees, and it just flew off into the distance. It was heading directly for the setting sun, directly west it was going from where I was. So I was looking kind of southward or southwest. It was heading basically west across my line of view.
Have any friends, relatives, anybody that you knew that knew Frederick Valentich?
No. No, I didn't know him. No.
Before,
until I read in the papers. I hadn't heard the name until it was in the papers.
And I want to get into that a little bit right now, because we're coming into less than our last 10 minutes of the first hour here. And to set the scene, kind of as a flash forward, what was the very first news flash you heard or read that this private pilot and his plane had gone missing? And in the first reports, do you remember whether they were citing extraordinary circumstances, which they might do just for sensationalism and, pump up the story, or because they're stuck with it because there was an observation, or it was just reported initially as a pilot and aircraft missing?
It was just reported as a missing aircraft. All the next day in the news, so that was, I think that was the Saturday evening I saw the plane go over. The next day, all the Sunday, during the day, there was radio reports that merely said an aircraft has gone missing over Bass Strait. It's believed the plane has run out of fuel and gone down in the sea, and there's an air and sea search that's beginning. And it went for about a week, the search, and they didn't find anything. But all that day on the radio, they were saying, this plane has run out of fuel, or we believe it's run out of fuel. And that was all that came out. And I have some radio reports where that is. I do have some archival ones, which I didn't. I should have sent them to you. We could have listened to them, but they're not all that interesting. They're just they mispronounced the name Valentich, which most people do. But anyway, they just say that this plane has gone missing and he's run out of fuel and there's a search. It's not much more than that. But
when did the story start to change? How many days passed before all of a sudden it's getting this sensational coverage and going out around the world?
within the first 24 hours. And years later, I found out why that happened too. They weren't going to tell us about this case. They were just going to say plane's gone missing, blah, blah, blah. We don't know what's happened. There was a businessman, and this is in the book. His name's Eric Ristrom. Eric Ristrom was the guy who headed the Australian Taxpayers Association. So he was always trying to bring the government to task over their new taxes and stuff like that. So he was learning to fly on the day, and he had a UFO sighting, and that got in the papers. This is years later in the early 90s. And I rang him up to ask him about this UFO sighting that he saw, because I was then involved in UFO research. And I was asking him directly. He was a publicly known person. I was asking him about his case. There was a couple of days after the report was in the paper about his UFO sighting, there was a kind of an explanation that came from I don't know where they said that what Eric had described was such an unusual weather phenomenon that they don't even have a name for it. But it was just the weather, folks. Well, apparently I rang him up. He said, look, more than 50 people reported it to the police from all around Melbourne, from a long distance away. And he said from where he was, it would have been about a mile in diameter, this craft that was hovering that he saw. That's what he told me. And I said, well, what do you think about this explanation that it was just an unusual weather condition? He said, well, that's bull dust. That's a lot of bull dust.
Translates very well.
And so he said, no. He said, and then he said to me, by the way, do you know anything about the Valentich case? I said, yeah, look, I've met Guido a few times. He comes to our meetings. He's looking for answers. I know about the case. He said, well, I was learning to fly that day, and I heard the radio. We landed, and we went into the office to write into the books that we'd landed safely and everything was, we were finished our flying lesson. He said, but we were told to shut up as we walked into the room because they were listening to this pilot live to air saying this thing was flying around him and chasing him down at Cape Otway. And so we listened to that, and he said to me, look, I could hear something go past the plane. He said it had the Doppler effect as it went past the plane. Now, years later, I got to hear the recording myself, and I couldn't hear any Doppler effect. But there was a continuous static interference that you could hear whenever Fred pressed the button and spoke. And maybe that's what Eric was talking about. But Eric thought when he was hearing it live that you could hear something going past the plane. But nobody else who was at that meeting, it's all the details are in the book, quite a lot of detail. But Eric was convinced that he could hear something going past the plane. As Fred said, it's going past me now. Fred said it's vanished, things like that, and then it was back again. And it was going so quickly that Fred couldn't get a good angle on what it was he was seeing. Yeah. And if you look at that photo on the front of the book, it's a strange looking thing. It's not symmetrical. It's an odd shape. It's all over the place. And there's all these little blue sparkly lines on little blue spots on one side of it. That's a lower resolution photo you've found there. That's an earlier one we had. It's not as high resolution as the cover of the book, but you can't see the grain of the film as much in that photo you've got up now. But that first one, the cover of the book, you can see all the details of what's there. But it's a very unusual thing. Now, there's been other sightings where people have reported the same shaped object as that, and it was making a funny noise. And that seems to be related to the Valentich case too, which we can get into in the second part of the show in high detail.
George, again, what is the stated estimate of the size of this craft?
Well, it would have to be guesswork. We don't know.
Of course.
Fred was asked, how is it a large object? Confirm. And Fred's answer was, cannot affirm because it has such speed. He couldn't get an idea of the size of it because it was going so quickly. The transcript, see, the recording is only a few minutes long, and there's a lot of space in that time frame where there was nothing said. So if you just read through the transcript, it's only one page. It only takes a minute.
We'll talk about that, the exact wording in the transcript shortly when we return. Peter Robbins here. Meanwhile, Here on Earth is the show. My special guest, George Simpson, joining us live from Australia. We'll be back in 4 minutes. Stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And we're back. Peter Robbins here, your host on Meanwhile Here on Earth. My special guest tonight, George Simpson, live from Melbourne, Australia. And we left off at a rather pregnant moment. You know, especially in shock situations, which is often the case in UFO, UAP confrontations, observations, sightings. Shock has very funny effect on us in terms of perception, auditory exclusion, tunnel vision, a slowing down of your other perceptions, a heightened sight ability, and sometimes size can be elusive. How big is it in your eyes based on how far away it is? We've had in the history of UFO studies, of course, some sightings have been reported as particularly large. My first thought is the JAL flight UFO, which was massive, very much like the one that Valentich encountered. The Stevensville, Texas one, which a number of witnesses, police witnesses, described as large as at least one aircraft carrier. These are not little ships. And this drawing here is one that is one of the ones on the estimate. Can you tell us about this drawing and why it's particularly relevant here?
Well, the overall shape of that object looks like the bottom half of the shape of the object on the cover photo of the book. With that photo was taken about 20 minutes before Fred flew into that area on the same day in the same location. That's why it's on the cover of the book. But this object here was in 2001. So it's quite a few years later, but in the same it's still in the same state of Victoria.
Yeah.
That object there was, the witness was an artist, and she said she screwed up the paper and started again several times. She wanted to get the shape correct. With the row of windows, the dome on the bottom. It's a very solid thing. It was hovering over her back fence in a place called Wanturna, which is probably a 1 hour's drive from my place here. But the overall shape of that object there is very similar to the overall shape of as I said, the bottom half of the strange object in that photo there. And also another photo, which I'm pretty sure I also posted to you, was the photo from Travis Walton's book. There, that one. That's the same kind of object, but looking up from underneath. You've got the row of windows going around with a dome on the bottom, a shiny dome on the bottom there. And that's, I think, the same kind of object. Now, what's really interesting was when Fred had this encounter, there was a report that came in. We didn't find out till years later that the next day in Adelaide, which is in South Australia, the capital of South Australia, it's a 450-mile drive from Melbourne to Adelaide, right? But the next morning, a farmer in Adelaide reported hearing a funny sound while he was harvesting some feed for his cattle, lucerne. They use lucerne as feed for the cattle. And this farmer said that he heard this unusual noise and looked up, and there was this large object above him, a big circular object. And he said, and there was an aircraft stuck to the side of this object. Now, that's in the book too. It's the second half of the book.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, he said as it flew away, it was making this strange noise, this screaming noise. It was a strange noise that got his attention in the first place. And why is that relevant? Because UFO sightings are normally silent. They're normally pretty quiet, pretty silent.
Not always, but normally, yes.
But normally. But this thing was making a funny noise, and he could see an entire aeroplane was sort of stuck to the side of it.
Yeah.
Now, I've tried to simulate what the farmer saw. You've got your helper with you. Your helper just walked across. This photograph in the book, which I tried to simulate what it would have looked like for the farmer, it's on page 93 in the book. It's a model that I made up.
Well,
I've
actually got that, and it's mind-blowing.
There you go.
This photo is a model mock-up, of course.
Yes.
Challenges the imagination and is really quite frightening to contemplate.
The funny thing about it is that the prop would have been spinning and cutting into the side of that object, That might have created that strange metallic sound at the end of the Valentich encounter, you see. But the funny thing is, years later, well, that sketch that the Diane McCool did, that black and white drawing we were looking at, that sketch, was in 2001. But years before that, there was a report of an object like this was flying around this whole area where we live, where Moorabbin Airport is. It's called Port Phillip Bay. It's where Melbourne is situated in Victoria. It's a large inland sea called Port Phillip Bay. It's 750 square miles of area, right? And this is where we all are situated. And from all around that bay, people reported seeing this UFO in 1992. Now, I recorded the TV news reports of that sighting in 1992 because I was interested, and there was different channels reported it differently. The government one was the most skeptical and made fun of it and was skeptical. Classic. The commercial channels treated it a bit more seriously. The most commercial channel treated it very seriously and didn't have any humour. Actually, they actually interviewed the police that got the reports about this sighting, and they treated it seriously, right? Now, the thing was, one of the witnesses said he was woken up in the middle of the night by this strange noise, and it was like an object hovering over the house with making a loud rumbling sound, like it had a bearing that was faulty or something, and it woke him up. Now, we also got that same description from somebody who lived in Adelaide, who was in Adelaide. Well, the farmer who saw that thing hovering over his farm said that he had his tractor running, but he could hear this funny noise. He thought his equipment was faulty. So he uncoupled it from the tractor, but the noise continued. And then he looked up. That's where the noise was coming from. And that's when he saw the object hovering above him. And he ran out. He thought it wasn't going fast enough to stay airborne. So he ran away to the side to get clear of it in case it came crashing down. And that's when he saw the plane on the side of it.
Oh, gosh.
And it seems like this object came back years later, still making the funny noise years later.
George, did you or any other known researcher, investigator, interview this farmer about this particularly memorable detail in the sighting? Mm-hmm.
I only heard about this story myself about 7 or 8 years ago. It was after we did the Unexplained. Do you know how you said that we had a bit of a chat and you were saying that people ask, why do you keep going over these old cases? It's because people come forward with information.
Yeah.
Right? Well, when the Science Channel did this in the show called The Unexplained Files in 2013, and I was on that show, we went out filming for 3 days around here, and various witnesses and people were in the show. Something came up when Bill Chalker is probably Australia's best known UFO researcher, worldwide. He's not very well known here in Australia, but worldwide people have heard of Bill Chalker. Well, he's a good friend of mine. You know, we get on pretty well.
Please send him my best wishes.
You know, he's a terrific guy. But he said to me, he rang me up once. He said, "Did I ever tell you about this investigation I did?" With a possible bizarre connection to the Valentich case. And I said, no, what was that, Bill? And he said, well, there was a farmer in South Australia, and it was the morning after Fred went missing, and he had this UFO sighting, and he said that there was either an entire aircraft or the wing of the aircraft stuck to the side, and he could see the registration number of the plane. No, you've never told me that. You know? So Bill went along. Yeah, you can just see the wing there. You would be able to read the registration number. The farmer apparently saw the registration number, didn't want to forget about it, so he scratched it into his tractor with a nail.
Oh, wow.
So he wouldn't forget it. So there's a tractor out there somewhere with VHDSJ scratched into it. I'd love to find it, but we don't know the name of the fella.
Wow.
See, we don't know the name. Now, what happened was Bill was doing some investigations. He took his friend. Went with him, Jeff Tilley. The two of them went out to do this investigation in central New South Wales, where he lives. Bill's in Sydney. He went into central New South Wales, where all these reports were coming from. In the early 90s, there was a big number of sightings reports coming in, especially from a little place called Coonabarabran. And that's in the book too. Coonabarabran is where there was a town, quite a big town, and there's a lot of telescopes there because there's a few hills, a bit of a mountain range, and they have a lot of telescopes in Coonabarabran.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say it's a pretty weird area. They got more UFO sightings than a lot of other places. But he went there to talk to all these UFO witnesses, and most of them said, you should go and talk to Laurie. Laurie ran the hardware store in Coonabarabran. He was interested in UFO reports, and every customer that came in, he would ask them, have you ever had a UFO sighting? If the answer was yes, he would write it all down in a journal. So he had all these UFO reports of the local area from all the people that came in. Now, there is this recording that he meant that we have now of this fella talking, and that's Laurie Ryder, who ran the hardware store, talking about this farmer that got off his motorbike and came into the shop and said that he had this strange encounter years before in Adelaide, and it was the morning after Fred had disappeared. And that's I sent you the link, I think, to that one.
Yes. Should we take a while? Should we get into that now?
Well, we could have a listen to what it's actually Laurie Ryder saying it. If you'd like to play that would make sense, I think, to slot that in, yeah.
Good, I agree. Here we go.
Well, the most interesting one of the lot is this farmer that he was baling hay, and he said the bearing in the baler started to scream and make a noise, and he'd been having trouble with it, and he thought, oh no, not this again. So he stopped, put the baler out of gear, dismounted from the tractor and turned round, and the baler had stopped and the noise was still going. And he said, I was trying to come to grips with this for a minute, and he said, then I became aware of a shadow and looked up, and he said I was under a big saucer, he called it, and he said going from the length of the bale and the tractor would have been 90 feet in diameter. And it was kind of, and as he's flown in aircraft and he gets his crops done, he knows when an aircraft's about to stall, and he thought, shit, this thing's going to drop on me. And he ran out beside the paddock, out from underneath it, looking up, and he said looking up under it, it kind of came in and went up just dark, you couldn't see anything. But the most remarkable part was, you know, on merry-go-rounds at shows, they have the horses, and they have, it's that wide, they've got these little wooden lats. Have you noticed them? They're nailed to it so you don't slip over.
Oh, yeah.
They're about inch and a half by half an inch. And then there's a gap, and there's another one. They're all around the edge. Well, he said that's what it looked like underneath, but there were two rows of them. If you blinked, you could see one row, which was rotating very fast, but the other one wasn't. And it was rotating in the opposite direction, but very slow. You could see it quite plainly. And he said as it moved slowly along, it kind of came up like that, but there was a piece sticking up out of the top, like a dome, and around the bottom of the dome appeared to be a black seal of some kind. That's what he took it to be, like a weather sword or something. And he said the dome had like a church door in it with an arched top, but no windows that he could see, and no handle on the door or anything. And he said on what he took to be the rear of it, there was slight protrusions that he would call rudders, and two big round holes, and he said there was shimmering heat coming out of one, and the other one, there were little spurts of flame coming out of it, and he gained the impression that one engine wasn't working, you know, because one disc wasn't spinning, and then, as he cleared it, he said the most remarkable thing of all, there was a Cessna aeroplane stuck to the side of it.
The whole aeroplane?
The whole aeroplane, yeah. He said, the aeroplane. The tops of the wings were flat against the side of it, and the tail was kind of hanging down, a bit clear of the edge. And he said there were no chains or ropes or anything like that visible. And I think he said there was some oil running down the side of the Cessna, and he thought this may have been ingested if there was an air intake underneath or something, because heat and flame coming out would suggest air burning, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Combustion
And anyhow, he scratched the registration number on the tractor with a nail, and he said, next time I come up, I'll give you the number. And he did. It's written down at the shop in a book. And the interesting thing is, it was the day following when that plane went missing between Victoria and Tasmania.
Right.
You know, when that one, he rang up and said there were lights around him and all kinds of things. Yeah.
So this would have put it back in around about October 78.
Yes, yeah. And it was the day following it. He said, anyhow, he said, this thing moved off in the direction of where the military manoeuvres were. He said it kind of went over the ridge. He said the last he saw of it with this high-pitched sound.
Oh, gosh.
Other figures.
I'm just really haunted by the allegations of this. It's something that I've not encountered in other casework before. We are, of course, the one thing we know for sure when we're in this subject, we are dealing with the unknown. And when people use the phrase advanced technology, I remember one of the things on Star Trek that now is so charming, they were 300 years in the future, as opposed to 800,000, a million,
right.
50,000. Anything is possible. It's one of the challenges of UFO studies, and the counter challenges. Prove me wrong. I just gave you my wild, crazy theory. Show me I'm wrong. It's sometimes difficult to establish both. On this one point, because it is so memorable, it's so dramatic, I know you have to have given a fair amount of thought. What do you think of the possible reality of this scenario?
Well, look, first of all, I've got to apologise for the sound quality, that squeaky noise. I tried everything to get rid of that squeak on the recording, and I couldn't remove it.
We were able to hear it. It's fine.
I'm not that proficient with my audio engineering. But that, look, the guy telling that story, I've tried getting into the South Australian Police archives. I've spoken to a whole lot of people there. I tried for many, many months to get something. I would have thought that the farmer would have reported that back in 1978 when that happened. I would have thought he would have reported it to the police or something. But it could have been that he feared ridicule. That might be why when he's spoken when he's gone into the shop and spoken to that guy we heard talking, that was Laurie, Laurie doesn't mention his name at all.
Sure.
He just said this farmer came in from South Australia one day. The story was that the farmer, they had a lot of problems with running their farms. They had a very bad drought in South Australia. So the farmer left South Australia and moved up to Sydney, up to New South Wales, where the climate was better, there was better rainfall, and he could continue farming up there. And he bought a property. That tape is longer. That was a shorter version of the tape. But he lived up in a place, the farmer moved into an area up there near a place called Barabra up in New South Wales. But he was somewhere around the Coonabarabran area, and that's why he went into the store, and Laurie saw him. But Laurie went on and on about owning motorcycles at the beginning. That is the shortened version of the tape. Laurie had a lot of detail, but the thing was, we couldn't get the name of the farmer, and so it is such a bizarre, as you say, such an unusual story and description that Bill got that recording and then he just shelved it and he didn't tell anybody about it. And he rang me up after he saw that documentary that we did on the Science Channel, where at the end, when Dr. Haynes puts the cassette in and plays that funny metallic noise and then Haynes says, that could be the sound. He said, far-fetched as it may seem, that could be the sound of these two objects coming together in the air. Yeah. But they've had an aerial collision. The prop's still running. It's banging into the side of this object. They've got stuck together somehow. We don't know how, but it could be that.
Controlled magnetism, but purely theoretical.
Gravitational or magnetic. I don't know.
George, one of the most intriguing details of the early press coverage, and when we were listening to the testimony there were two articles. One of them, the one with Frederick Valentich's photograph in uniform there, that was the big one that I remember being promoted in the States, as a scan, as a Xerox or whatever. And one of the things that intrigued me about it then, and does now as well, because it's an irregular shaped article and, it had a column that continued to go down, it included the full transcript, I think the full transcript, but certainly of the Melbourne facility, recording. And that's very rare in a UFO case, of course, that you get something like that. But it strikes me, if indeed, again, anything is possible. Perhaps Mr. Valentich is alive and relatively well in an environment something like astronaut Dave Bowman ended up in at the end of 2001. We don't know, or he is long gone and lost his life in 1978 or something between. We don't know. But it occurs to me, because of the extremely unique and unusual circumstances of recording his observations, the last words that anybody knows him saying on Earth, and ending with that incredibly grating sound of metal on metal. What is it, 12, 18 seconds? I mean, it doesn't happen in a second. You have the transcript at hand of the exchange with Melbourne Tower?
Yeah. It's actually Appendix 2 in the book. So you can...
Good. Would you mind taking a moment and going to Appendix 2 in the book and just reading it verbatim? And again, this is uncontested, folks. This is absolutely the description. And I guess my final point is, by quirk of circumstances, and I don't mean to over-romanticize or get morbid, this may be the equivalent of deathbed testimony. This is somebody saying, with all, the truth and sincerity that they have, what they're seeing or experiencing, and then they're gone.
Well, that's actually what transpired, because he was flying along. He originally got to Cape Otway at around 7 p.m. It was about 6:15 when I saw the plane go by. So it was a 3/4 hour flight to get from my place to Cape Otway, but he still had about half an hour to go to get to King Island. But what the pilots do is they go along, it's above the Great Ocean Road, above all the surf beaches. When they get to Cape Otway, which is the southernmost bit, there's a landmark there. There's a lighthouse. And that's the point where you turn left and then you head down. You turn to the left and you're heading south then towards King Island.
And George, his altitude at this point is about 5,000 feet, if I remember?
Yeah, 4,500. He says that in here. He's asked and he tells it.
Please continue.
So when he's reached Cape Otway, he's got onto the radio and he has said, well, actually, before he got there, they corrected his search and rescue time because he was running late. Steve said, do you want to correct your search and rescue time? And he said, yeah, SAR time it's called. So they adjusted that because he was running late. Otherwise, he would have set up an emergency search because he was running. He didn't get there on time because he was delayed somehow. So they've corrected that before he got to Cape Otway. Now he's reached Cape Otway. He said, okay, I'm at Cape Otway and I'm now proceeding to King Island. And then for about 6 minutes, there's other aircraft talking to the air traffic advisor. Now, this whole area where he was a long way from the city and from the country towns and everything. It's quite an isolated area, and he's going to head out over the sea to this island. So he's not in controlled airspace. He's in uncontrolled airspace. And so technically, he doesn't come under the control of air traffic controllers because he's not in controlled airspace, but he has access to air traffic advisors. And Steve was playing that role that night. Steve Raby was the air traffic advisor for that region. So he's just advised Steve that he's now heading down to King Island. And then there's 6 minutes of other people talking, other radio transmissions, not related at all to DSJ, sure. Okay? And all of those transmissions are perfectly sharp and clear transmissions of information. Although one of them has such a strong Scottish accent, I can't understand a word he says. And I can't understand, I don't know how Steve Raby was able to answer him and talk to him because I can't make out a word this guy says with his Scottish brogue. But anyway, then after about 6 minutes, Frederick gets on the radio and he says, Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000? And he gets a reply rather rapidly, Delta Sierra Juliet, no known traffic. So that's the answer that he gets from Steve. Then Frederick says, Delta Sierra Juliet, seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000. Because it's flying around him and he knows he's below 5,000. So the answer is, Delta Sierra Juliet, what type of aircraft is it? And he says, I cannot affirm. It is for bright. It seems to me like landing lights. And so that is acknowledged by Steve. Steve says Delta Sierra Juliet. So just saying, yeah, okay, got that. Copy that, basically. Mm-hmm. And then there's a bit more of a gap and a few seconds go by. And then Frederick says, Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. DSJ was the plane's registration number, Delta Sierra Juliet. The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above. And so Steve says, Delta Sierra Juliet, roger, and it is a large aircraft, confirm. And this is the answer. Fred says, unknown due to the speed that it's travelling. Is there any known air force in the aircraft in the vicinity? So he's asking, is there any Air Force aircraft in the vicinity? Right. They're the only things that he knows of that can go this quickly. Jets and things that fly around, fighter jets. Yeah. And the answer is no known aircraft in the vicinity. So then he says, Melbourne, it's approaching now from due east towards me. And so that's acknowledged, Delta Sierra Juliet. Then Fred presses the button for a couple of seconds and there's this noise, static coming over, but Fred doesn't actually say anything. And then he says, Delta Sierra Juliet, it seems to me that he's playing some sort of game. He's flying over me 2-3 times at a time at speeds I could not identify. Now, what's that? What can fly over you rapidly 2 to 3 times at a time, and it's so quick you can't work out what it is you see? That's what he's saying. So he's saying there's something going on here, and I don't know what's going on. And you were telling me there's no aircraft, there's no Air Force people. No, I don't know what's going on, but there's something going on here. So then Steve says, well, Delta Sierra Juliet, roger, what is your actual level? He says, my level is 4,500, 4500. And then Steve says, okay, Delta Sierra Juliet, and confirm you cannot identify the object, this aircraft. And he says, affirmative. No question, just straight away, no hesitation. Affirmative. Delta Sierra Juliet, roger, stand by. So, well, what else can he do? He's flying his plane and describing something, and he can't work out what it is. Nobody knows what's going on yet. And then he tries to help out a bit here. Fred does. He says, Melbourne Delta Sierra Juliet, it's not an aircraft. It is.
There you go.
And then he doesn't say anything.
Yes.
He's looking at it, and it's not an aircraft. It's
a.
And hang on, he hasn't got the words to describe it because it's such a strange thing.
Yeah.
It's the thing. I believe it's the thing on the cover of the book. It's very hard to describe that thing. It's got blue sparkly dots around it on the sides. It's an odd shape, and it's zapping around him at an incredible speed. So anyway, then so Steve wants to get a handle on this, and he says, look, Delta Sierra Juliet Melbourne, can you describe the aircraft? Because Steve's not sure it's an aircraft now because he knows that they both are aviation people. They know what aircraft are. And the answer he gets back is Delta Sierra Juliet. As it's flying past, it's a long shape. And then he holds the mic open for a few seconds so a bit more of the staticky noise comes in. He says, I cannot identify more than that. It gets such speed. It has such speed. Then there's open mic again for a few more seconds, more noise. And this says, it's before me right now, Melbourne. So Steve says, Delta Sierra Julia, Roger, and how large would the object be? And Steve says, and Fred says, Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne. He doesn't answer the question. He says, it seems like it's chasing me. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me also. It's got a green light and sort of metallic-like. It's all shiny on the outside. And so Steve says, Delta Sierra Juliet. So he's not actually flying to King Island now. He's orbiting. He's going in a big circle because that way he's not going to go off course if he's going in a circle. He will just stay where he is relation to where he's traveling to.
We assume or we know that he has enough fuel to do this.
Yes, it's a long-range aircraft. It's a 1A2L, which has extra large, and it was fully fueled before he left. He could have flown all the way to Adelaide without stopping or twice that far. Anyway, so now there's open mic again and this strange static sound. I've said to people that it sounds like if I had an industrial sewing machine on this table and it was running at a fair whack, it'd be going clickety, 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 click. That's what this sound was coming over Fred's radio. Nobody else's radio had that strange sound. But anyway, he says, Delta Sierra Juliet has just vanished. And so that gets acknowledged by Steve. And then he says, Melbourne, would you know what kind of aircraft I've got? Is there certain military aircraft? And Steve says, can you confirm the aircraft just vanished? He says, say again. He says, is the aircraft still with you? He says, it's now south, approaching from the southwest, because he's lost his orientation for a minute while he's been going in the circle. And he's got to work out and look at his compass and see where's north and where's south. He's been going around in a circle for a few minutes. So now he says, oh, that's approaching now from the southwest. And so that's acknowledged, Delta Sierra Juliet. Then Fred says, the engine is rough idling. I've got it set at 2324 and the thing is coughing. So 2324, it's 23, it's manifold pressure, 23 inches of manifold pressure and 2,400 RPM.
Got it.
That's what the plane's running at normal cruise, steady rate, but it's got a staticky, it's coughing, it's playing up. Mm-hmm. So now that changes everything. You've now got a guy who's halfway over the sea to an island and he's got a bit of a problem with his engine. What do? How can you help somebody when you've only got a radio communication and you're hundreds of miles apart, 100 miles apart? Yeah. So he says, Delta Sierra Juliet, Roger, what are your intentions? So that question really refers to, okay, are you closer to the mainland or are you closer to the island? Yeah. Which way do you want to go? You need to land if you've got your engines playing up. What are you going to do? And I think Fred misinterpreted it under the stress of the moment, trying to describe this thing flying around him. And he said, look, my intentions are to go to King Island, because that's what he was doing. And everybody knew that. He was about halfway there. Then he said, Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. Then there's 2 seconds of noise. And then he says, it is hovering. It's not an aircraft. And so Steve says, Delta Sierra Juliet. So he's acknowledging it. Okay, I heard that. And then there's a little bit more time goes on, but not much. And then he goes, Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne. And then he gets interrupted before he goes to speak. That's when that metallic sound comes in straight away. The clacking 17 seconds of noise. And then Steve calls him a few times and gets no reply. So that is how it is on the tape. That's been transcribed accurately from the tape. Haynes thought that there was 6 minutes missing from the recording.
Interesting.
And he speculated that there was some communication going on between Melbourne and Fred, but which never got onto the tape. But no, there was no communication between Fred and Melbourne during that 6 minutes. They've just cut it out because it's boring. It's 6 minutes of other people talking about where they're going and what they're doing. It's nothing to do with this case. It's 6 minutes of wasted time to listen to it. There's nothing. Nobody's come and cut some scary bit out of it.
That's the question that we have, obviously. Yeah.
The scary bit's all there. It seems to be chasing me.
Yeah.
That got transcribed incorrectly, though, in the papers. They said it seems to be stationary.
Amazing.
That's what they said. But no, he said chasing me. And Haynes, when he gave his talk in Melbourne, 20 years after it happened, Haynes came to Australia and gave a talk. And Haynes said, I'll get into hot water over this one, but he said, I've heard the tape, and he doesn't say it's stationary. He says it's chasing me. But that's got much more sinister implications than it's stationary. If there's anything but stationary, they're flying through the air together. But anyway, when Haynes later said that that funny metallic noise at the end could be because of the prop coming into contact with this object, that would explain why nothing ended up in the sea. Nothing was found. They searched the area for a week, and they never found anything at the bottom of the sea. They never found anything in the sea,
That was my next question. Obviously, a search would occur between military, civilian authorities, police, whoever covers that. And we have a lot of sea here to cover. So if, let's just say, whatever happened, and there was mechanical failure or ran out of fuel or whatever went into the sea, we should not necessarily see it as sinister or mysterious or conspiratorial, that absolutely no trace of the aircraft or volantage, not even an oil slick, was found. Is that fairly reasonable to say?
That's all logical. It's perfectly logical. It doesn't match what we know about the case, but it's logical.
Let's continue right there, because now, of course, in a way, a little like the Travis Walton story, we're dealing with an alleged missing person and the possibility of murder. Here we're dealing with an alleged missing person and an aircraft being snapped up by an unknown, UFO. This has to appeal to the more prurient interests of media, and certainly I want to thank you personally for Rupert Murdoch. As far as I'm sure the Australian press had something of a field day with this on one level, but on another level, this is a serious story. When you got involved in the story, how did you first approach and get to meet, and your impressions of spending time with Frederick Valentich's father?
Yeah, well, many years after this case happened, I got involved in the UFO Research Society. I joined the group just as a member, I started going to meetings, and I showed a bit of enthusiasm, and there was a report on the radio, and we don't know if it's been fully debunked or not, but there was that the space shuttle reported, they said, Houston, this is a discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under observance. Everyone's heard that. Now, people are saying nowadays that was actually some guy made that up and it was all faked. But that's a good way to debunk and discredit somebody. I haven't spoken to the bloke who made that recording and put it out. It might be genuine, but it's very easy to sling mud on something and say it's not real. The story was that it was a Canadian fellow who was recording directly from the radio feed from the shuttle while the things were in orbit. He was getting these reports as they were happening, and he recorded that, and then he put it out for everyone to hear because they weren't going to let us know about it.
Yeah,
so that all makes sense to me. Why would somebody hoax that and make that up? There's no money to be made in ufology. No. It's an interesting subject, but there's too many blockades to that. Anyway, so that I went along to the meeting and I presented that, and we played that at a public meeting and everything. They eventually asked me if I would join the committee because some guy, they had a big argument and left, and they had a gap, and would I join the committee? And I ended up getting on the committee and as a photographic consultant because my area was cameras and photographs and stuff.
Sure.
And people would send in photographs, and I could quite often figure out what caused it, or whether it was a hoax, or whether it was real, or a light flare, or one was a hole in a negative created a strange effect in the print, but it was a staple hole in the negative. But you get all kinds of things like that. And the negative used to tell the story, but nowadays you don't have a negative because it's all digital. Nowadays anything can be faked. So
that's right.
You have to just totally disregard anything nowadays. But the beauty of that Roy Manifold photo, which is on the cover of the book, that's the grain of the film you're seeing there. That's the actual grain of the film. He took that, and he thought there was something wrong with the developing process, and he took it to the Kodak lab, and he asked them. They investigated that. They looked at it under a microscope and told him there was nothing wrong with the film, and it wasn't created by some error when they were developing the film. You've captured something there, and we don't know what it is. So he didn't even get that film developed until a month after Fred went missing, because he took the photos of the setting sun. He didn't see anything unusual when the photo was taken because he wasn't looking. He was watching he was counting off 30-second intervals on his watch because he was getting a series of sequential photos of the sunset. That's what he was doing. And so he didn't even see that object that was right in front of him, and it's in the photo because it made no noise.
As to, again, your contact ultimately with Mr. Valentich, what were your impressions? What did he have to tell you? And how long after the disappearance was this? That's okay.
Sorry, I went right off. Fred started coming, Guido started coming to the meetings because he was looking for answers, and he had a keen interest in the subject because he had no choice but to investigate the whole, is this real, is it not? And the government gave him a copy of the sound recording because it was the last recording of his son's voice. Interestingly, when they did that, they cut Steve's voice out of the tape. It's only Fred's voice on the tape. Anyway, yeah. So I don't know whether that was for legal reasons or something. I don't know. Sure. But so Guido was just a lovely guy, and he was grieving from the loss, the mystery. There was no answer. He had no closure and no answer, and Terrible. He was looking for answers. And he came to the meetings because he was looking for answers, and he would talk to anyone. And I sat down with him many times and chatted to him about the possibility that Fred could be living on another planet somewhere, in another part of the universe, and be perfectly happy.
What a thing to think, about your son or daughter, given that it's not out of the question.
It's not out of the question. There were such strange circumstances by which he disappeared, it's a very unique case because you've got a pilot in the air. He's airborne. He's reporting the thing as he's seeing it near him in the air.
Exactly.
Then he's disappeared. The thing has disappeared. There's an unusual sound at the end. And then, 10 or 20 or 30 years later, we hear about this farmer who said that this thing was above him and making this noise. And as you heard when Laurie was talking, he said the thing disappeared over where the military manoeuvres were. There was a military base near the area where the farmer was. And he said there was some military exercise going on that day. So in our Victorian UFO Research Society, one of our members had very strong connections to the Army, was an Army member, and he checked the records for us for that date and found, they were having military exercises in that area on that day. So that confirmed that the farmer knew that he could hear the bombs going off or whatever, and the thing flew off making a noise towards where that Army exercise was happening. There could be Army guys out there that saw this thing go over and were told to stay vector. You could get yourself blown up if you're not careful. Stop looking at the sky. We're testing these cannons or whatever it is they were doing in the Army. So, but it confirmed it. We had confirmation that the Army did have an exercise happening in that area at the time. But we just don't know who the farmer was. We're really hoping that somebody will read the book and they'll say, "Oh, I know who that farmer was." I'd like to interview them or their family, find the tractor with the registration number scratched in it, whatever,
George, obviously, Guido Valentich did not know, as none of us know, what actually happened. Did he share with you what he felt or thought or believed had happened?
Well, yeah, he had a very strong belief that that Fred had encountered this unknown object and that he was now probably somewhere under their jurisdiction. He was with them somewhere. Wow. He was hoping that would happen. He was hoping it wasn't a simple air accident.
Exactly.
That's the end of the story. And because you don't have a body, you can't have a funeral, you can't have closure.
Terrible.
That's why he got that memorial plaque made. Yes. That's why that was done. And that's down at Cape Otway, which is the last landmass that Fred flew over.
We'll take a look at that in a moment. Radar, of course, is an established tool going back, of course, decades now.
Yep.
Was Valentich's Cessna being observed on radar throughout this encounter? And if so, when or at what point did it disappear off radar?
Well, no, the radar guys were contacted during the conversation between Fred and Steve. They realized something was on. And the radar guys were contacted, and the radar guy was told, "Look, we've got this plane down at Cape Otway. He's reporting this thing flying around him. Have you got anything on radar down that way?" And the radar operator said, "No, I've got nothing on radar down there at all." He said, "I've got a couple of returns coming from an area a bit further north than that, but nothing that I would say was an aircraft. So no, there's nothing coming back from the radar." Then that's why I titled the book "Nothing on Radar," because the radar guy checked and there was nothing coming back. No radar returns.
They had Valentich's plane on radar, but
no.
Okay.
No aircraft in the area where Fred was, which was halfway to King Island. There was no return coming from there at all. So
fascinating.
It just didn't pick it up.
You had mentioned this very moving plaque.
Yep. Yeah.
And we have here a photo of a colleague of yours with the plaque.
Well, that's Steve Roby, the last fellow to speak to Fred while he was flying.
Gosh.
That's Steve Roby visiting the plaque down there at Cape Otway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to keep a fix on the humanity of this individual, this was a real guy with dreams and hopes for the future and a family and plans. And he's here one moment and he is gone the next.
Yeah, yeah. That photograph there with him leading edge to the car, he looks about 18 to me in that photo. And I think that might have been when he got his driver's license, but I'm only surmising. It might have just been a random photo.
George, as we
that
come
photo's
into
never been seen.
As we come into our last few minutes here, what are your conclusions regarding Frederick Valentich's disappearance, the UFO, and this story that you spent so long in researching and investigating?
Well, I just have to accept all of the data and the details that we have of the case as they've come in, what was on the tape, what's on the transcript, what was reported, what everybody involved with the case, the last person who spoke to Fred. It all, to me, it's just it happened. I saw him fly past. He disappeared. To me, it's one of the most intriguing cases that I've ever come across in UFO research, and I've been involved with a lot of UFO investigations and things since. And that sketch was years later, but it's the same shape as the object that seemed to be flying around Fred. The thing was flying around years later, still making a funny noise. There was a television cameraman who was only 6 years old, living in Adelaide the day that Fred disappeared. He and his brother were woken up in the early hours of the morning by this strange noise. They looked out the window and there was a big circular object over their house making this funny noise in the early hours of the morning. But it could have been the same time that later in the morning the farmer saw the same thing, because it was in the same town or the same general area as the farmer. So,
George,
something strange has gone on and we don't know. All I can say is, we don't know.
Bottom line. The book, of course, is Nothing on Radar, The Valentich Mystery, available, I'm sure, on Amazon and other locations. Do you have a website, or where can people go to contact you, learn more about your work?
Well, I have a Facebook page. People could contact me just through Facebook at any time if they want to.
Great.
I haven't set up a web. I should have a web page just for this book where people can discuss this book.
You should.
I haven't done. That's a bit remiss of me. I need to do it, but I haven't done it yet.
Well, I am looking forward to finishing the book. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. You and I will continue to be in contact. It is now about to be the beginning of winter here, and about to be the beginning of summer there. Enjoy watching the water go down the drain in the complete opposite direction it's supposed to, as I understand it. Again, greetings from America. Thanks so much for taking the time for the show. And if you have enjoyed this show, please tell your friends. Otherwise, stay well, stand up for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. We'll see you next week.